Welcome to Powerhouse 2021, a speaker series hosted by St. Michael's Hospital Foundation. And today we've got a special edition focused on research and discovery. Our scientists are going to discuss how they customize medical treatments, devices, and medications to meet the particular needs of each individual patient. Why is this important? Because it contributes to St. Michael's ambitious program to reinvent the care experience for all Canadians. I'm Nora Alfreder, Chair of the Research and Education Committee of the Board of Directors of Unity Health Toronto, the health network that combines and joins St. Michael's Hospital, St. Joe's Hospital, and Providence Healthcare. I'm passionate about research. Why? Because it's research that generates the innovation and the insights that improve our health, our wellness, and how we experience patient care. I'm passionate about research at St. Mike's because St. Mike's is one of only a handful of hospitals in Canada that do a full spectrum of health science research. And they do it with global impact. What do I mean by a full spectrum of health science research? It's things like discovery science that can uncover the root causes of disease. It's translational science that can test and pilot innovative solutions. They can examine the effectiveness of interventions in improving patient outcomes. In short, what works well, what doesn't, that's called clinical research. They can unpack and optimize healthcare access and delivery at a systems level. That's health services and policy research, and it impacts entire populations. And they can guide healthcare practice and policy change. That's what we call knowledge translation. And if there's one thing that the pandemic has taught us and shown us over the last few or many months, it's how much research matters, and matters now more than ever before. So before I turn over the proceedings to our scientists, I want to acknowledge the sacred land on which St. Michael's Hospital operates. It has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwa and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations. Now, please welcome Dr. Ori Rothstein, the Vice President of Research and Innovation at Unity Health Toronto, who will share the vision for research and moderate the discussion with our panelists. Ori?
Thank you, Nora, and welcome everyone. Scientific research, as Nora said, is a key driver of system-wide change, and never more so than today. In fact, health research is undergoing a revolution, powered on the one hand by technology to understand better the fundamental basis of disease, and on the other by a global awakening to social justice, equity, and inclusion. As a globally renowned hospital-based research enterprise, our new vision aligns with those of St. Michael's Hospital. Namely, we will carry out world-class research and innovation that transform patient care and population well-being. While doing so, we will bring together our patients, their families, and their communities to co-create the best care experience. We're focusing on areas where we're uniquely positioned for global impact. And in fact, we've already made contributions in a number of areas. In critical care, including the areas of sepsis, trauma, and intensive care unit care. Urban and community health, including the areas of homelessness and housing, healthcare access, social policy, youth and Indigenous health. Organ injury and repair, including age and disease-related fibrosis, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And finally, brain health and wellness. For instance, in multiple sclerosis, traumatic brain injury, mental health, and substance abuse. The scientists you'll hear from today have been selected for a number of reasons. First, because each of them represents one of the 4 pillars of world-class of research and innovation that we do here at St. Michael's. Second, because each of them is focused on research that is driving breakthroughs in customizing care to help individuals and populations, which is today's big topic. And finally, because they are simply the tops in their field. So this is how the program will work today. First, I'll introduce each of the scientists who will share what they're doing in customized healthcare. And then we'll have a panel discussion, after which we'll have a live Q&A for approximately 20 minutes. If you'd like to ask one of the panelists a question, type it into the Q&A chat box on the screen. We'll hold all questions for the Q&A. And I'll pose as many as I can to the speakers. And for those of you who submitted questions in advance, we will address those when we have time at the end. If you have technical difficulties, click on the tech support fact or the tech support chat at the bottom of your screen, and one of our techs will help you. So today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link to rewatch the session after the event. And of course, we encourage you to share it with your friends, your families, and colleagues. So let's get on with the show. So first up is Dr. Laurent Broshard. Dr. Broshard is a critical care physician who holds the Keenan Chair in Critical Care and Acute Respiratory Failure. We recruited Dr. Broshard from Geneva, Switzerland. In fact, he is one of the top experts in mechanical ventilation in the world, and he's been working tirelessly during the COVID-19 pandemic to improve ventilation for patients in acute respiratory distress during this pandemic in the intensive care unit. So Laurent, please tell us about your innovations in customized mechanical ventilation and how you see the future of critical care.
Thank you, Ori, and I'm delighted to be here. So I'm sure everybody has heard about mechanical ventilation during this pandemic, and you may remember the pressing question initially was, do we have enough ventilators, and which was a legitimate question. But then you may have also heard about some controversies like, do we really need to place all these patients under mechanical ventilation because some of them do not do very well? And that's again very good questions, because mechanical ventilation is a very complex procedure. It replaced the respiratory system, which is a system interacting with the circulation, interacting with the brain, and you need to decide when to use it, so at which time, for who are the good patients, what way, what mode of ventilation we say, so how we should deliver it. So that's a lot of very important questions which have important consequences for the success for the patient and their stay in the ICU. So this is all about research. And as you say, we have been doing this research before, but we have been doing a lot addressing this question during the pandemic. So we really want to offer the best experience for patients. And as you know, in the ICU, we are sometimes patients who have been sleeping under the mechanical ventilation. So we want also the best experience for their family. And we think we can really offer the next step for the delivery of mechanical ventilation, which will be the future of intensive care.
Well, thank you very much, Laurent. So next we have Dr. Tara Gomes. Dr. Gomes is an epidemiologist and a principal investigator in the Ontario Drug Policy Research Network. She holds the Canada Research Chair in Drug Policy Research and Evaluation. Tara, the ODPRN has discovered some very disquieting parallels in the progression of COVID-19 and increases in the magnitude of the opioid epidemic among disadvantaged populations. Can you talk about your findings and what needs to happen in terms of customizing health policy and interventions at the population level?
Yes, thanks, Ori, and I'm really pleased to be here today. Myself and my colleagues have been really concerned during the COVID-19 pandemic about its disproportionate impacts among people who use drugs. for many reasons. One being that we know that community-based services had to change their accessibility because of the needs for social distancing and lack of PPE. And we also know that, one of the public health responses here is for people to physically distance and socially isolate from people. And that can be a way in which we really increase the risk environment for people who use drugs, who may now no longer have somebody there to intervene if they overdose. So we've been working with the Chief Coroner and Public Health Ontario and community-based workers to try and better understand these changing circumstances around opioid-related deaths in the province. And in a report we just released, we found that there has been an 80% increase in opioid-related deaths during the pandemic. And what is really challenging is we're seeing that this is largely being driven by an unpredictable, unregulated drug supply. We're seeing that this is impacting populations of people who are experiencing homelessness, particularly, as well as seeing high rates of deaths in some of the hotels that have been repurposed as shelters and isolation sites during this pandemic. So, bringing all of this together and seeing how this is affecting all parts of the province and not just a few small or large urban centers, but all parts of Ontario, it's really reinforcing the fact that we need to tailor our response to the overdose crisis, to these changing circumstances, and focus on our efforts on bringing community-based programs and harm reduction services to where people are, whether it be rural and remote parts of the province, or whether it be these hotels that are providing people with safe spaces during the pandemic. And I think that if we can do this, we can make sure that people have access to these programs during this pandemic, and that the public health responses that we have to COVID are also keeping people safe around their opioid use.
Well, thank you very much, Tara. So now we'll hear from Dr. Jiwan Oh. Dr. Oh is the medical director of the Barlow MS Center, which is opening its doors next month in a gorgeous brand new space in our new hospital tower. She is also a multiple sclerosis neurologist and one of the few experts in the world using multiple imaging techniques to explore the impact of multiple sclerosis on spinal cord tissue to predict who will develop MS even before symptoms appear. Jiwan, tell us about the Barlow MS Center and your unique approach to personalizing treatment for MS patients, and how you're using advances in technology to improve the care experience.
Thank you, Ori, and really delighted to be here on the panel today. Probably MS is a pretty familiar diagnosis to most Canadians, just because Canada happens to be one of the MS hotspots in the world, and it's one of the few chronic neurological diseases that affects people in their 20s and 30s. So as you can imagine, this is when people are starting out with their personal and professional lives, so it can have substantial personal as well as societal repercussions. We're very lucky in the MS field because it's one of the few neurological fields where there's been an immense amount of progress in the last 10, 15 years, to the point where the number of treatment options that we have has tripled. But we still have a lot of challenges in clinical practice, including the fact that it's actually pretty difficult to deliver personalized medicine to people living with MS, mainly because we don't have all of the right tools in clinical practice to accurately predict how an individual patient will do. And another challenge that we have in clinical practice is that we don't always have access to all of the interdisciplinary care teams that people with MS need. So for instance, obviously, I'm a neurologist, and neurologists play an important role in the care of people living with MS, but so do psychiatrists, so do physiatrists, so do physiotherapists and occupational therapists. And this is where we have a huge and unmet clinical need. And so the Barlow Center, really hopes to address some of these issues that we have clinically and scientifically in the field. Our top priority is to really try to improve care access pathways for our patients. And so in this beautiful 2-story facility that really looks amazing, and it's going to be the top 2 floors of the Peter Gilgan Tower, so kind of going to be a symbol of hope for people living with MS. We will have the facilities, and we're just starting to build the interdisciplinary teams so that our patients can access the care that they need. In addition, we're completely committed to research and innovation as well as education in the field. And this is not just education for future generations of clinicians and scientists, but also for people living with MS. So for the research and innovation piece, because we now have the facilities, we're really trying to integrate seamlessly research into our clinical care so we can constantly embed evidence, the latest evidence-based care into the care that we provide for our patients. We're really building out on our scientific portfolio. St. Mike's has had a long history of excellence in clinical trials in MS, but we're now really building out our advanced imaging arm as well as basic sciences arms, and our teams are really growing quickly. So we're all incredibly excited to be moving in. I'm very grateful to our donors who have made this possible and look forward to contributing to clinical care and research and innovation in the MS field.
Thank you, Joanne, for that very exciting news. Our last presenter is Dr. Subodh Verma. Dr. Verma is a heart surgeon and holds the Canada Research Chair in Cardiovascular Surgery. He's exploring treatments for South Asian populations who have a disproportionate incidence of cardiovascular diseases. Subodh, what do we know about different populations based on race and ethnicity, and why they're more prone to developing cardiovascular disease? And what treatments are more effective for one group compared to another? And how does that knowledge translate into us being able to deliver customized care?
Well, thanks, Ori, for this wonderful invitation. And thank you to all of the attendees who have tuned in to this webinar to listen to us. It's a very exciting time in cardiovascular disease, particularly as it relates to understanding the intersection between how ethnicity can potentially be an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. As a heart surgeon, we've noticed for many years that there is a disproportionate number of patients of South Asian ethnicity who actually undergo open heart surgery and, also called bypass surgery. And there's a large number of patients who actually need coronary angioplasty or have heart attacks at a young age. And collectively, the data suggests at this point that people of South Asian ethnicity that actually comprise, people of ethnic origins in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, for example, are at a 3 to 5-fold higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease. They develop cardiovascular disease at a younger age. They require angioplasty or surgery at younger ages. And unfortunately, cardiovascular death rates also tend to be higher in this population. So I'm not here to give you bad news, but to actually say that we're thinking about this problem at St. Michael's Hospital, and we're thinking about solutions to this problem. And the solutions are many. One is trying to understand why this is occurring. Is it just a clustering of additional risk factors, or are there novel, unique risk factors in this population? Does it have underpinnings in diet or other types of sort of habits that certain ethnic groups may have? Or does migration have a role with respect to uncovering abnormalities in glucose and insulin homeostasis? Does the type of care we offer patients with South Asian ethnicity from a cardiovascular standpoint need to be geared towards earlier surveillance? Do we need to provide more tailored approaches to monitoring patients after they've had a heart procedure? And at the end of the day, we're also, studying this problem at the bench, looking at, novel markers of why patients of South Asian descent develop diabetes earlier, which may actually be one of the common themes that drives the excess risk in this population.
So thank you very much, Subodh. Now we have some time for panel discussion. So let's first address our institutional mission of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and how we can support and advance it in our research to customize healthcare. I know that in our strategic plan, we aspire to build world-class research and innovation in our declared scientific pillars. We know that a commitment to ensuring diversity, equity, and inclusion in all activities will help us achieve our lofty goals. That is why we've made this one of our strategic enablers in our plan. So perhaps I can draw on your expertise, Dr. Gomes, and tell us a little bit about disadvantaged communities and how that might be impacted by our approach.
Thanks, Ori. And one of the things that makes me so happy to be part of St. Michael's Hospital is this commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion across the institution. And definitely within our research program, this is one of our core priorities. And one of the ways in which we try to do this is by considering an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens with the way in which we undertake projects and the priority of the projects that we do. A couple of years ago, we ran a number of focus groups across Ontario where we were speaking with people who used opioids to understand their experiences within the healthcare system, interacting with clinicians, as well as how drug policy was changing. And we really wanted to understand what their personal experience was with that. And one of the things we really heard loud and clear was that when people lost their family physician for whatever reason, they had a really hard time finding a primary care physician to accept them into their clinical practice. And many people felt that this had some roots in stigma around their drug use, as well as the challenges that can come with providing, broad and holistic care to somebody who either has a substance use disorder or is dealing with chronic pain. And when we heard this, we thought it was really important to kind of take a step back and look at all of the vast data that we are fortunate to have access to across the province to try and see if this was something that we could see occurring systematically. And when we did that, we found that there is a real systematic reduction in people's ability to find a family physician if they use opioids, and in particular, if they're being treated for an opioid use disorder. And for me, this is the kind of work that I find so important because it represents an opportunity for us to really bring together these findings from research with the perspectives of people who are really living within our healthcare environment to drive policy change for the better and to identify these inequities that can be entrenched within our healthcare system so that we can find ways to improve those, to remove those barriers, and to promote equity and access to high quality care for all of Ontarians.
Thanks very much, Tara. So let's move to you, Dr. Verman. Perhaps you can reflect on the importance of involving people with lived experience in research, specifically how the group of researchers here at St. Michael's Hospital who are members of the South Asian community might be viewing this in terms of their path forward in research.
I think that's a wonderful question, Ori, and there's a large number of clinicians and healthcare providers at St. Michael's Hospital who are part of the South Asian community. And they recognize as well the sort of gravitas of the problem with respect to, early cardiovascular disease, early risk of diabetes. And resultantly, we have a really wonderful group of clinicians and other healthcare providers that have come together to address this from a diverse lens. And that is not only from sort of understanding the basic biological mechanisms, but also many of the other sort of societal and sort of cultural aspects that go into delivering, care that is appropriate to the South Asian population. It might include, in fact, earlier screening or intensive screening efforts. And that's certainly something that we would really appreciate support from donors on is, the opportunity to create a high-risk South Asian clinic where patients could actually be screened with appropriate, risk factor control such that disease can be identified early. We also have some real superstars like Dr. Prabhat Jha, for example, at our institute, who's actually trying to look at the problem not only here, but also tying it to India and looking at why people are subjected to such high rates of morbidity and mortality in the Indian subcontinent and whether migration has to do with that as well. So I think in general, we have a really, well-invested group of clinician scientists here of the South Asian sort of ethnic group that are taking this problem quite seriously, particularly since a large number of South Asians live in Ontario. And St. Michael's Hospital, we're really privileged to take care of a number of South Asian patients. So understanding what drives disease and what solutions can be offered is extremely important to tailoring their care experience.
Thank you, Subodh. Let's change tack a little bit and talk a little bit about another aspect of our commitment in research, and that is the patient, family, and community partnership model of research that we do here. And I'd like to ask each of you sequentially maybe to give your perspectives on that and how we've incorporated patients, families, and communities into our research and how that might influence the outcome of the research that we're doing. So Tara, why don't we start with you, and then we can move through Gwen and to you, Laurent.
Absolutely. We generally focus in our research on big data, and I think that is something that often doesn't properly give us that context on the patient experience. So something that we have been really working to do within our group is trying to expand that scope and find ways to engage with patients and understand their perspectives and overlay that with what we see within our data so that we can better provide recommendations for improvements within the healthcare system. And one of the ways that we have been doing this is actually by pulling together a citizens panel, which is a group of people from across Ontario who have interest in drug policy, but don't have any particular expertise in one topic, but really want to come together to provide us with that overlay of what their perspectives would be on government changes to policy or changes to accessibility of different medications. And this is a highly engaged group of people. I'm consistently amazed at their engagement and the depth of critique and information that they can provide to us. And we have found that by using evidence and identifying potential policy recommendations that are rooted in the classic ways that we do research around systematic reviews and clinical trials and economic evaluations, using that to come up with a slate of recommendations, and then using our citizens panel to actually provide that additional context allows our policymakers that we engage with and clinicians who we engage with to have a better understanding on what that reaction might be if changes occur and how they can better educate the public or adapt their policies to make sure that they are properly balancing all of their priorities.
Thank you, Gwen.
So in MS care, because MS is a chronic disease and really a disease that lasts decades, if not a lifetime, we are realizing more and more that patients really need to be partners in the entire care journey. It's not just in clinical care, but whether you're talking about research or education, patients really need to be partners and completely invested. And so we're really taking this to heart at the Barlow Center. And what we're doing is we've established a patient focus group. So any sort of clinical care pathways or changes that we're making, we are getting patient input every step of the way. From a research standpoint as well, we want patient input. So with different focus groups, we are also incorporating patient input into research study design and even things like recruitment practices. And finally, from an educational standpoint, we're looking to, again, not just educate people living with MS so that they can be partners in this entire journey, but we're looking to ask our patients to be educators of the next generations of clinicians and scientists. So really taking this principle of patients as partners in every pillar that we're focusing on in the MS Center.
Thanks, Gwen. So Laurent, previously you alluded a little bit to some of the challenges of working with patients and family when their loved ones are on the ventilator, unable to communicate. So maybe you could comment on some of the innovations that you've used to keep families connected and informed with their loved ones, particularly during COVID-19.
Yeah, that's an important point. And maybe I can switch to my clinician role in the ICU. Usually we have a 24/7 open policy, so families can come at any time, because we think that's really key for the communication aspect and the good of the patient in the ICU. Everything stopped during the COVID pandemic, and we understand the reason, to avoid spreading the virus. But this was very tough situation, and as many in the hospital, we decided to switch to video conference using Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. So not only communication between the medical team and the family, but also having the families seeing their loved ones and maybe communicating minimally with the patient in the ICU, which has been great. On the fact that it's probably something we should continue, not to replace the usual visit, but to offer additional ways to continue to contact their loved ones. And one point I'd like to stress is that we did a lot of research, as you mentioned, during this pandemic. And for research, you need to explain why the research is going on, what are the challenges, what are the questions we'd like to address. And we had a lot of additional conversation with families about research. And as you know, being part of a clinical research trial study is more or less altruistic, right? Because you don't know what will be the benefit, but you hope it will be a benefit for the future patients. And that is a very good opportunity to go deeper into the question they have about the disease, what we know, what we don't know, what we expect to see. And this research engagement, I would say indirectly, has been really beneficial to keep this communication and contact, which has been really a challenge during the pandemic.
So thank you, Laurent. So I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit about bench to bedside research and the promise that fundamental research will be able to lead to new discovery and help patient care. Certainly, the development of the COVID-19 vaccine is probably one of the most remarkable examples of how fundamental research underlies clinical innovation and inventions in care. So Subodh, you do a range of research from very fundamental through to clinical trials, and I wonder if you might speak a little bit about how basic or discovery research can improve patient care by customizing.
I think for our viewers today, I'd like to stress that research is a real continuum, right? It starts in many cases at the bench in a laboratory with a hypothesis, with a question that needs to be tested in let's say smaller sort of experiments, controlled experiments, sometimes tissue culture, sometimes animal models, and then it sort of really takes a stepwise sort of trajectory, if I may, towards the next stage, which is testing it in larger experiments, and then finally testing it in humans, and then testing it in clinical trials, like Laurent does, and like I do in some cases. And when you reflect back on many of the things that we take for granted, today, drugs that lower cholesterol and are very valuable for cardiovascular disease, or some of the newer therapies for diabetes that extend life and reduce cardiovascular complications. The genesis of that is always in the laboratory, and that's where the questions and that's where innovation really begins in many regards, at least pharmacologically or from a drug standpoint. So really understanding that bench to bedside approach is critical, and investing in that bench to bedside approach is critical, because that's where many of the solutions for tomorrow reside. So at St. Michael's Hospital, we not only have this beautiful bridge that really connects the clinic to the research institute, but that is a real symbol of what we stand for. We stand for excellence in clinical care, as you've heard. We stand for excellence in research, and we stand for excellence in ways to connect these two pathways. And I think that's what we do remarkably well. Of course, in our group, we do a number of studies trying to understand novel mechanisms and novel pathways that are involved in diabetes, for example. And at the same time, we test them not only in smaller experiments, but in humans. And if they're successful, then we actually apply the clinical trial rigor to see if they can actually be proven unequivocally as an advance. And it's only through that, deliberate effort of a bench to bedside approach that we can make, the lives of our kids and grandkids better in the future, and hopefully have better solutions to treat cardiovascular disease and diabetes.
Subodh, thank you for that explanation. Let's go to the last question or part of the panel. And that topic is in data and advanced analytics. And we have so much data in healthcare that we can use to improve patient outcomes. And by applying AI and analytics to create a personalized care plan for patients. So working with Dr. Mohammed Mandani and the data science group here at St. Michael's, we're today inaugurating the Advanced Data and Analytic Management Center, so-called the ADAM Center. This center will allow our clinicians and our scientists to seamlessly access mountains of data in healthcare and use advanced analytics and artificial intelligence to better understand and direct the care of our patients. So let's hear from the three scientists here who have some experience with AI and analytics about their experience. Why don't we start with you, Laurent, and perhaps talk about harnessing the power of AI in the critical care setting.
Yeah, thank you, Ori. So I mentioned briefly that we need to offer the best experience to the patient to really understand the interaction between what we do with the mechanical ventilator and what the respiratory system of the patient is doing, the brain of the patient, the heart of the patient. And we have realized that we can get this information from what we call some physiological signals. This is the signals you see on monitors when you look at the ECG, which is the cardiac contraction, or the blood pressure. When I see a movie with my wife, I always tell them, oh, look at the monitor. This is what the ventilator is doing. So we have been recording these waveforms for these signals for many years, and we understood they contain the information telling what's going well and what's going wrongly between the patient and the ventilator, and looking at signals from the brain, signals from the lung, and signals from the heart. But this is a colossal amount of information. This is the number of data, because we don't want data every minute, we want data every milliseconds. And we cannot do that without the modern techniques like, machine learning techniques, artificial intelligence, and because we need to process everything at the same time, recognize what we call patterns, which indicate that the patient is doing poorly or will do poorly, so which can recognize earlier than, clinically. We sometimes use this phrase, we say, oh, the patient is fighting against the ventilator, which is really terrible. So we want to determine continuously online what's happening and how to better manage the patients in terms of the adjustment of ventilation, the adjustment of the medication for pain, for putting the patient asleep or waking up the patient, etc. So we are very excited because we have been working progressively on, short terms, small number of patients, then bigger, longer terms, and bigger number of patients. And we think it's time to implement such a system in real life, working 24/7. And I think the result will be immediately the potential for better management of the patients, a much more, granular knowledge of what's happening and how we can do better, and also a huge source of information for future knowledge and study. So it's both for the experience of the patient tomorrow, if we can do it, and also for the future of delivering mechanical ventilation and improving short-term and long-term outcomes of the patients.
Thank you, Laurent. Jiwan, you've been using and developing a new AI tool to help in treatment of MS patients. And I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So in the MS clinic, we've had a bit of an organizational problem, and this is because we have a huge patient population. We follow over 7,000 patients per year, and we've never actually had an MS clinic registry or database to organize all of the information that we have on our patients. And this is obviously needed for clinical care, but also for research purposes. So a number of years ago, thanks to our hardworking database team and a large group of students, we started to populate our MS clinic registry. Thanks to the blood, sweat, and tears of many, many different people, we were able to capture clinical information on 6,000 of our 7,000 MS patients to start populating this database. And so working together with Mohammed Mamdani's data scientist team, using the data that we had already populated manually, we were able to use AI and machine learning to train computers to auto-populate the database, which obviously is incredibly efficient because it saves a lot of time moving forward. Now what we're doing with all of the natural language processing and lessons that we've learned from this exercise, we're trying to use machine learning to help us predict how individual patients will do over the longer term. And as I alluded to earlier, in clinical care, accurate prediction and therefore personalization of treatment is one of the greatest unmet needs that we have in MS clinical care. We're also using the AI techniques that were developed from that initial project to help with a lot of clinic processes, including even relatively mundane things, but things that take up a lot of time, like filling out insurance paperwork. And so we're just starting a pilot project trying to do that. So as you can see, harnessing the power of AI and machine learning has a lot of clinical utility in our MS clinic.
Thanks very much, Jiwan. And so, Tara, you've talked a little bit about the large data sets that you work with. Maybe you could give us a specific example of how that's really made a difference in healthcare.
Yes, absolutely. Our research program is really fortunate to have access to a large data repository of healthcare data elements housed at ICES. And one of the ways that we have been working with this recently is to be looking at a group of drugs called biologics. These are a group of drugs that have been shown to be very effective at treating a number of different indications, but are very costly. And despite the of biosimilars, which are essentially generic equivalents to these drugs, there's been very limited uptake across Canada. And a lot of this has been tied to the way in which these are reimbursed through public drug programs. So what we've been doing is leveraging this huge database that we have on every single prescription for a biologic that has been dispensed across Ontario for one of these indications, and understanding exactly how that data could have changed if the ministry would have implemented different policies around reimbursement. So we can use this real world evidence and we can build it into our models and actually very accurately estimate what the cost implications would be for government if they changed the way in which they reimbursed these drugs. And by doing that, we can see that for some of these drugs, the Ministry of Health could save $100 million annually by implementing policies that have been introduced in British Columbia and elsewhere in Canada. And so you see these numbers and you think, well, that policy change seems obvious. That's a lot of money. And that's true. However, we also, as I mentioned earlier, really prioritize engaging with patients as well. So we've been working with patients throughout this project from the outset to try and understand their perspectives. And we've heard from them that there are real concerns about switching medications, potentially destabilizing their conditions, as well as some potential barriers to accessing these medications because the way that they're provided is pretty complex. And if the manufacturer changes, that could change their ability to get these drugs. And so what I found really helpful with all of this engagement on this project is that we can not only identify using big data and real world data what the cost implications would be for the government of making some of these policy changes, but we can also provide the government with very concrete ways in which they can proactively address some of these barriers that have been identified by patients so that any changes that are made, if or when that does happen, don't negatively impact the patient experience and their quality of life.
Thank you, Tara. Now we have about 15 minutes for the Q&A portion of the program. We've had some questions that have come in through the chat, but also some that have come in from our guests who are pre-registered. So why don't we start off with some of the pre-registered one, and I can read it out to you. Maybe Jiwan, you can take this first one. Any hope for new treatment for secondary progressive multiple sclerosis?
Yes, so a lot of hope, and just taking a step back, I just wanted to highlight that, I talked about earlier that it's been an incredible time in treatment in the field of MS, but effective treatments for progressive MS are a huge unmet need in the field. And so this is where a lot of attention and focus and funding is being focused right now. Really good news though, for the first time, we actually have a treatment that's been approved by Health Canada for secondary progressive MS. And this just happened last year at the very beginning of the pandemic. It's a drug called Ponemod, and very important because it's the first phase 3 trial that has clearly shown a benefit, but it's also important to put these findings in context just because, yes, there was clearly a benefit, but it seems most beneficial in a subset of SPMS patients, and the benefit was modest at best and reduces disability progression by about 21% at 2 years. But really, the good news is there's a huge focus on effective treatments for progressive MS, namely treatments that can help to repair damage that has already been done, which is really the key. And so there are huge efforts, including ones at St. Mike's, like the Canadian National Progressive Cohort Study, where it's actually a huge national cohort study where the 5 largest MS centers in Canada have come together so that we can follow people for 5 years. And the hope is that over time, this will provide important insights into what causes progression in MS, which will essentially set the stage for the development of better treatments that can remyelinate and repair.
So thank you very much, Jiwan. So Subodh, I know that you're a heart surgeon, but I also know that you have an interest in the biology of diabetes. And so I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about some new research that's going on in the area of diabetes.
Yeah, sure, Ori. Well, first, thanks again to all of our attendees who joined our webinar today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm delighted to speak to you about diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So there's a lot that occurs at the interface or intersection between diabetes and heart disease, and that's why a heart surgeon is interested in that field. Specifically, diabetes is one of the most important risk factors for the development of cardiovascular disease, and therefore finding treatments in diabetes that not only reduce sugar but also improve cardiovascular outcomes is quite important. So there are 2 general classes of new medications that have actually emerged over the last few years. One of them are called Sglt2 inhibitors, and the other ones are called GLP-1RAs, and both of these are probably one of the most unique therapies we've ever had in diabetes. And I say that because these are the 2 therapies that have been shown to reduce cardiovascular events by a large amount in people who have diabetes and either have risk factors or have established cardiovascular disease. So they had sort of early beginnings a few years ago, and now have become dominant in the guidelines as being sort of mainstays of therapy. So great new advances for people with diabetes, and a lot more occurring at our hospital in terms of understanding how these agents actually work. And in fact, some work that we've done together, Ori, you and I, trying to underscore the interface between the molecular signals that are important in providing cardiovascular protection with these new agents.
Thank you, Subodh. Laurent, why don't we move to you now? So maybe you could comment on customized healthcare and maybe the use of new innovative mobile apps and other remote options to help individuals self-diagnose their medical problems. Can you comment on it and give us your perspective?
Yeah, thank you. We are very excited by the possibilities offered by the new technology. I'm just thinking that it may well be that in the near future, we will have smartphones able to detect from anybody what's the temperature. You're not surprised because we do that already by camera, but also your heart rate and also your oxygen in the blood. And the reason is that the smartphones have been working a lot to try to improve the quality of photographs, and they use various wavelengths, and wavelengths are the signals we use also in the ICU, for instance, for detecting the oxygen in the blood. So I'm not sure they are quite ready, but it will come soon. And for instance, maybe it will tell you not exactly that you have COVID, but that you have fever, that you have a heart rate which is really high, and that your oxygen in the blood is too low, and that you need to come to the hospital. It may also be helpful to monitor patients at home instead of coming to the hospital, for instance, adjusting oxygen. So there are a lot of possibilities around that, which are really exciting. One of the big limitations when you want to go to like a personal diagnosis is the confidentiality issue, which needs some work to be, because you don't want this data to be spread out everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. So Tara, the next one's for you. So you're now part of the new research pillar called Urban and Community Health. Some people might grapple with how what this means in terms of impacting on the community. So can you maybe describe how a person's research could actually impact onto the community and onto an urban center?
Absolutely, yes, and thank you for that question. I think that we know within public health and within the research that many people do that there are huge differences in the way in which people access healthcare and healthcare services within urban and rural environments. And in particular, within urban centers, we know we have large populations and high population density, and there's a lot of socio-demographic diversity in these populations. And so I think that it speaks to there being unique needs within urban centers in terms of the type and scope of healthcare services that are made available. And so what we've really learned is that we can use research, and as I've spoken about a little earlier as well, we can use that research to really tailor responses. So if we think about an issue like the overdose crisis right now and how it is impacting all parts of the province, there's still a need to understand how it impacts differently urban centers and different communities. And importantly, with the more recent research that came out, we saw that 2/3 of opioid-related deaths were occurring in large urban centers. So it really speaks to the need for us to make sure that we can then provide and understand into these urban centers as to how they can provide the appropriate services and appropriate accessibility and safe spaces to different parts of that population to make sure that we are addressing these issues, because it is clearly one that is focused within some urban centers. But tied to that, I think we also recognize that there are other communities that also grapple with issues like this. So a lot of our research specifically has been trying to get that information out at that tailored regional level to both urban and some of the smaller parts of Ontario as well. And we have an online publicly available tool, for example, that has more than 50 opioid-related indicators around harm reduction and treatment and prescribing. And we did that because we know that data, we've heard from Hamilton that they're integrating it into their strategy, and that's a more urban example, but also places like North Bay and Temiskaming are taking that and integrating an understanding of what's happening within their communities to support family practice and hospital care and make sure that they are tailoring the services that they invest in throughout the specific needs of their communities.
Okay, thanks, Tara. So there's a clinical question here, and maybe I'll give this to Subodh and then Jiwan to answer. Maybe each of you could comment from the surgical side and the medical side. What's been the impact of COVID on the patient flow in the hospital? Obviously, we had shutdown, but wanted to talk about more recently with the kind of the gradual opening and how things are going to occur. Subodh, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Ori, I don't know where to start and where to end, but I will say that this has been one of the greatest moments of privilege as a healthcare provider at St. Michael's Hospital. I never thought that over the last, 15 years of being here, I would ever see anything like that, and I would ever see the flexibility and resilience with which, and the dedication with which the Institute has actually really stepped up to the plate and addressed the issues head on. So, the care of people with COVID and the care of people without COVID has actually been relatively uncompromised. And I say that, with great pride, that we have taken care of the sickest of the sick patients with heart disease, while also taking care of the patients who actually need COVID treatment. So that's been a very focused and nimble sort of approach. Things are getting much better from a cardiac surgery standpoint, from a heart surgery standpoint. Our institution has always said, heart surgery is a priority and things are being opened up. So people who have been waiting a little bit longer for their elective procedures are going to start seeing their procedures being moved up. And certainly, we were turning the corner not only for heart surgery, but for all of the other surgical specialties as well.
Thanks, Gwen. Gwen, you want to comment from your standpoint, the medical standpoint?
So I think, with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, as with many other medical specialties, essentially the MS clinic was forced into learning how to adequately provide virtual care. And, thanks to resources that the hospital has provided us, this is something that we've been doing throughout. And even now, the majority of our patients are being seen virtually, usually either by Zoom or telemedicine or by telephone. And the interesting thing is, because in MS care, we rely on patients to really monitor their symptoms, and their subjective kind of reporting of symptoms plays a huge part in clinical care. And we also use tools like MRI to help monitor disease. It looks like virtual care likely will become a part of care moving forward, hopefully even after we continue on past the pandemic. So we'll have to see how that evolves. And, some of us have been more reluctant than others to embrace this technology because, there's things you can do really well virtually, but then there's things that, old-fashioned face-to-face care is required for. So we'll have to see, but I think it's really exciting because in a way we were all thrown into this, but then we've realized that it can really become a useful tool in clinical care and actually be really efficient because patients don't necessarily have to travel from all over the province to come see us.
Thanks, Gwen. There's a lot of excitement around the Barlow Center. So one of the questions is, when is it going to open?
So, surprisingly, the date has not been pushed back that much. Even last year, they were saying sometime in May, maybe June. We've now been officially told that we'll be given the keys sometime in the second or third week of July. So it will be a phased move-in process. Obviously, we need to start with admins, then clerical support, and then research, and then the clinicians will move in. But I really think we will be up and running by sometime in August. So really can't wait, and look forward to welcoming our patients there come late summer.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that update. So one of the things that we all do is that we train the next generations of researchers and clinician scientists in the future. So maybe we could quickly go around the room here and kind of get your perspective on the challenges and the needs. So Laurent, why don't you talk briefly about that?
Maybe just to go along the line of the COVID patients, this, in the ICU, it has been, we almost tripled their capacity, and we got a lot of help from many people in the hospital, and everybody wanted to help. In a way, people were exhausted, were working really hard and were learning at the same time, but did not complain and found a real important meaning to what they were doing. So I think this this pandemic, in a way, will give a boost to medicine, to research, because people want to do more, to know more, and realize that there is so much we can learn and do. So I think for research, it will be a lot of excitement, and many people will join.
Okay, good. And so I think it's really time to wrap up. Some great answers to a number of questions. So a big thanks to our co-hosts, Nora Offrider, and our excellent panelists and discussants, Dr. Gomes, Dr. O, Dr. Verma, and Dr. Broshard. And to wrap up, I'd like to introduce the closing speaker, Gwen Harvey. So Gwen is a member of the board of St. Michael's Hospital Foundation and the co-founder and the co-chair of the spectacular Angel's Den. She and her family, the Keenans, have been ardent champions of research at St. Michael's Hospital for many, many years. So thank you very much for closing, and thanks for joining us today, Gwen.
Thank you, Ori, and thank you, Laurent, Tara, Gwen, and Subodh, for sharing your work with us. This is an exciting time to be at St. Mike's. Over the last decade, St. Michael's has evolved from a local hospital into a global powerhouse in medical research, education, and patient care. Over that time, our family has been a proud supporter of St. Michael's research. It's a mission we believe in because medical discovery holds answers to our biggest health challenges. The pandemic has only underscored the importance and the urgency of research, from basic science through to clinical research to policy and knowledge translation. And as we get set to reinvent the care experience, one of the biggest health challenges yet, research will help us. For anyone who is keen about research, I encourage you to sign up for notices from the Foundation. And we welcome all of you to join us on November 18th for Angel's Den, which is being held virtually this year with the help of an experienced production company. Angel's Den has become one of Canada's most important and exciting medical research competitions. It's when St. Michael's all-star scientists battle it out in front of celebrity judges, jurors, and a national audience to win major funding towards their breakthrough ideas. Please visit angelsden.ca to learn more. And if you're interested in supporting research, we do have an opportunity for you to get right in on the ground floor of bringing a medical breakthrough to life and to get an insider's view of our research enterprise. It's called the Research Innovation Council, and we'd be happy to speak with you about it. Thanks again for joining us today for Powerhouse 2021. On behalf of all of us, we hope you have a great day.